Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. He doesn't belong here. The security guard's words cut through the rain, slicing the boy's dignity in front of everyone. Droplets mingled with tears on the child's face as he stood frozen, his threadbare jacket soaked through. The school entrance buzzed with activity, students rushing past with matching blue uniforms, some pausing to record the spectacle. Teachers hurried by, briefcases shielding them from both rain and responsibility. The morning's gray light painted harsh shadows across the security guard's face as he stood like a sentinel at the gates of opportunity. The boy clutched his worn backpack tighter, 13 years of life and recent grief weighing on narrow shoulders. Behind him, a black car slowed to a stop, its window rolling down silently. None of the laughing students noticed the familiar face watching from the shadows, eyes narrowing at the scene unfolding on this ordinary rainy morning. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and stay with us. Subscribe now. The security guard towered over the boy, his badge gleaming under fluorescent lights as rain drummed against the school's metal awning. "School policy. No uniform, no entry," he announced, loud enough for the growing audience of students to hear. His voice carried a note of satisfaction, as if enforcing this rule somehow elevated his own importance in the daily hierarchy of school life. The boy, Michael, had spent the night ironing his only clean shirt. 3 weeks since his mother's funeral, and the uniform she'd carefully saved for still remained locked in the apartment manager's office, along with most of their belongings. His father worked double shifts now, barely home long enough to notice what Michael wore to school. The boy's fingers trembled slightly as they gripped the backpack strap, knuckles white with effort to hold himself together. "I just need to get to class," Michael whispered, his voice almost lost beneath the chorus of whispers and snickers from his peers. A girl pointed her phone camera directly at his face, narrating for her social media audience. 2 boys in perfect uniforms leaned against the brick wall, amusement dancing in their eyes. A teacher glanced over, hesitated, then hurried past with a stack of papers clutched to her chest. The guard stepped closer, his bulk casting a shadow over the boy. "Rules are rules, kid. Come back when you're dressed properly." He gestured dismissively toward the street as if brushing away an inconvenient piece of trash. The rain intensified, sheets of water cascading from the school's roof, creating a symbolic barrier between Michael and the education that might be his only escape from poverty. His shoulders slumped under the weight of yet another system failing him. At the curb, the black car's engine idled softly. Through rain-streaked windows, Keanu Reeves watched the scene unfold, his planned meeting with the district's arts program temporarily forgotten. He recognized the particular cruelty of the moment, not just in the guard's actions, but in the collective indifference surrounding them. The actor had grown up with financial instability himself, remembered the sting of being visibly poorer than classmates, of systems designed to highlight rather than hide those differences. He observed how the boy refused to cry despite the public humiliation, how he stood with quiet dignity even as his world collapsed around him. Something in that silent resilience struck a chord. Keanu's hand reached for the door handle, decision made before conscious thought finished forming. The rain would soak his suit, the paparazzi might catch wind of his location, his schedule would be thrown into chaos. None of it mattered compared to what was happening on those school steps. Things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching. Michael turned away from the school entrance, each step a surrender. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead, his worn sneakers splashing through puddles that reflected the gray sky above. The security guard's voice followed him. "Maybe tell your parents to care a little more about the rules next time." The comment landed like a physical blow between his shoulder blades. Parents, plural. As if his mother hadn't spent her final days worrying about him. The sound of a car door opening barely registered until a tall figure stepped onto the sidewalk. Students' whispers shifted tone instantly, the rustle of recognition spreading like wildfire. Michael glanced up through rain-soaked eyelashes to see a man in a dark suit approaching, umbrella unopened in his hand, allowing the downpour to drench him completely. There was something familiar about him, something Michael couldn't immediately place through the blur of emotion and rainwater. "Excuse me," the man called, not to Michael but to the security guard. His voice was quiet yet carried effortlessly across the space, commanding attention without demanding it. The guard turned, annoyance morphing instantly to shock as recognition dawned. "You're—" The guard stammered, suddenly straightening his posture. Students began frantically elbowing each other, phones raised like periscopes searching for the perfect angle. A teacher stepped out from the doorway, drawn by the sudden shift in atmosphere. "I am," Keanu acknowledged with a simple nod, neither embracing nor rejecting the recognition. "I couldn't help noticing what happened here." He gestured toward Michael, who stood frozen in disbelief, rain streaming down his face. "May I ask what policy prevents this young man from accessing his education today?" The guard shifted uncomfortably, authority dissolving under unexpected scrutiny. "School uniform policy, sir. All students must wear proper attire." His voice had lost its earlier edge, replaced by a deferential tone reserved for those whose status exceeded his own. Keanu turned to Michael, crouching slightly to meet the boy's eyes directly. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentle, private somehow despite the dozens of onlookers. "Michael," came the whispered reply. "Michael Torres." "Michael," Keanu repeated as if committing it to memory. "Would you mind telling me why you're not wearing the uniform today?" The crowd fell silent, phones still recording, but their owners suddenly aware of being witnesses to something more intimate than spectacle. Michael swallowed hard, shame warring with the simple human need to be understood. "My mom died," he said, the words hanging in the rain-soaked air. 3 weeks ago. Cancer. The uniforms are in our apartment, but we—" His voice cracked slightly. "We got behind on rent while she was sick. The manager locked our stuff until my dad can pay. He's working all the time now." A collective intake of breath rippled through the onlookers. One girl lowered her phone, her expression shifting from entertainment to uncomfortable self-recognition. The security guard's face flushed, his earlier righteousness curdling in the face of context he'd never bothered to seek. Keanu laid a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder, both offering comfort and turning him slightly away from the prying eyes of the crowd. "Thank you for telling me," he said, his voice carrying genuine gratitude for the boy's trust. Then he straightened, turning back to the guard and the school entrance beyond. His expression remained gentle, yet something had hardened in his eyes. Not anger, but resolution. "I'd like to speak with the principal," he said, the quiet request carrying the unmistakable weight of certainty that it would be granted. "And Michael will be coming inside with me. This story is only getting deeper. What would you do in this situation? Comment below, and let's talk." The principal's office buzzed with nervous energy. Mrs. Velasquez, a woman who navigated district politics with practiced efficiency, found herself uncharacteristically flustered. The security guard stood against the wall, eyes fixed on the floor, while Michael occupied a chair that suddenly seemed designed for someone much smaller than his 13 years. "Our uniform policy exists to create equality among students. Mrs. Velasquez explained, her hand smoothing an already immaculate desk calendar, to eliminate visible signs of economic difference and prevent bullying. The irony hung thick in the air. A policy meant to protect had become the very instrument of Michael's humiliation. Keanu sat beside Michael, still rain-soaked, seemingly unconcerned about the puddle forming beneath his expensive shoes. "I understand the intention," he replied, his voice carrying neither accusation nor judgment. "But when the execution of a rule causes more harm than the problem it aims to solve, perhaps we should reconsider our approach." Outside the office windows, word had spread. Students pressed against glass. Administrative staff found sudden reasons to pass by the office door. Through the building's walls came the unmistakable buzz of social media exploding, the story already spreading beyond the school's physical boundaries. "Michael has faced an unimaginable loss," Keanu continued, his hand resting lightly on the back of the boy's chair. "His focus should be on healing and learning, not on whether his grief makes him presentable enough to enter a building designed for his education." Mrs. Velasquez's carefully maintained professional veneer cracked slightly. "We weren't aware of his situation," she offered weakly. "That's precisely the point," Keanu replied, leaning forward. "Rules without compassion become weapons. Systems without flexibility become barriers. We never know what battles someone is fighting behind the scenes." Michael sat straighter in his chair, something shifting in his posture. For weeks, he'd carried his grief like a secret burden, something to hide and overcome alone. Now, watching this stranger advocate for him with such quiet conviction, he felt a different kind of visibility. Not the humiliating exposure of the school steps, but the relief of being truly seen. "I'd like to propose a solution," Keanu said, turning to include Michael in the conversation rather than talking about him as if he weren't present. "An emergency uniform fund for situations exactly like this one. I'm happy to make an initial donation, but the school needs a systematic approach to supporting students in crisis." Mrs. Velasquez blinked rapidly, the possibilities unfolding visibly across her face. Both the positive impact of such a program and the PR nightmare that would ensue if she rejected a celebrity's compassionate proposal. "That's a wonderful idea, Mr. Reeves. We could establish it immediately." "And Michael attends classes today," Keanu added, not a question, but a gentle finality. "With dignity intact." The principal nodded, suddenly seeing beyond the rain-soaked boy to the struggling student who'd continued showing up despite his world collapsing around him. "Of course. And we'll retrieve your uniforms, Michael. The school can address any outstanding issues with your housing manager directly." The security guard shifted uncomfortably against the wall. "I was just following protocol," he muttered defensively. Keanu turned to him, expression thoughtful rather than accusatory. "Protocols are important," he acknowledged, "but they should serve humanity, not the other way around. The greatest protocol any of us can follow is kindness." A knock at the door interrupted them, a teacher holding a folded uniform. "My son left his spare set in his locker last week," she explained, her eyes conveying silent apology as she handed it to Michael. "It might be a little large, but—" The simple gesture, born not from policy but from human connection, hung in the air like a prayer answered. Michael accepted the uniform with trembling hands, 13 years of practiced stoicism finally cracking as tears slid silently down his cheeks. "It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it." "20 minutes later, Michael walked down the school hallway in a slightly too large uniform, Keanu Reeves beside him. Students lined the corridor, whispers following their progress. But something had shifted in the atmosphere. The phones still recorded, but expressions had transformed from mockery to something closer to reflection. News traveled faster than footsteps in a high school. Everyone now knew about Michael's mother. "Sorry about your mom," one boy offered awkwardly as they passed. A girl who'd been filming earlier stepped forward, quickly pressing a folded note into Michael's hand before retreating. The hallway parted before them like a tide, respect replacing the earlier scorn. At Michael's classroom, Keanu stopped. "This is where I leave you," he said quietly. "Think you'll be okay from here?" Michael nodded, the borrowed uniform still stiff, but somehow imbued with a different meaning now. Not a symbol of conformity, but of community stepping in where systems had failed. "Thank you," he whispered, the two simple words carrying the weight of transformation. By afternoon, the story had spread beyond school boundaries. Local news vans clustered at the curb, reporters eager for a glimpse of the Hollywood star who challenged an educational system with quiet determination. Inside, administrators huddled in emergency meetings, crafting press releases about their new Compassion First Uniform Assistance Program, conveniently omitting the morning's events that had necessitated it. Mrs. Velasquez personally delivered 3 complete uniforms to Michael's classroom, along with a discreet envelope containing a grocery store gift card. The security guard approached during lunch break, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine contrition as he apologized. Teachers who'd hurried past that morning now made points of connection, asking Michael about assignments, offering assistance with missed work during his mother's final days. Across social media platforms, the video spread like wildfire. Not just Keanu's intervention, but the conversations it sparked about rigid rules, hidden struggles, and what true equality in education might actually require. Commenters shared their own stories of grief, of systems that had failed them, of moments when simple human compassion had made all the difference. That evening, Michael's father returned from his double shift to find an envelope containing keys to their apartment, their belongings released from administrative limbo. A note explained that the school had handled the outstanding balance. He sat heavily on their worn couch, the weight of constant struggle momentarily lifted from his shoulders. "Someone important saw me today," Michael explained, recounting the morning's events. "Really saw me." Across town, Keanu declined interview requests, redirecting attention to the school's new emergency assistance fund, which had already received thousands in donations. The story wasn't about a celebrity intervention, he insisted, but about what happens when we look beyond appearances to see each other's humanity. 3 days later, Michael arrived at school wearing his own uniform, properly fitted and pressed by his father's careful hands. The social media storm had largely moved on to newer controversies, but something had permanently shifted within the school's culture. Students who might have previously mocked difference now considered what battles their classmates might be fighting privately. Teachers incorporated discussions about compassionate policy into their lessons. And one boy, walking taller through hallways that once terrified him, carried the most important lesson of all, that sometimes being seen in your most vulnerable moment becomes the very thing that helps you stand in your full strength. Wow, what a story! If this moved you, imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think.